Hi, my name is Bev Raimbault. I work for the Faculty of Environment in the Ecology Lab. For this series, I've been asked to talk about planting or growing from seed. Now, growing plants from seed is something that maybe sounds a bit funny because most plants are grown from seed unless you're doing vegetative propagation. However, you can see in my garden behind me here, there's a variety of different plants. You can see tomatoes there. And these tomatoes were not planted directly into my garden. So they were bought at a nursery, which had started the plants from seed. But then I was able to buy them, plant them in my garden, and this allowed me to get a little bit of a head start on the growing season. So that works for plants like peppers and tomatoes, cucumbers, but not all plants like to be transplanted. And so those ones, it's better if you direct seed them into your garden where they're actually going to grow. So when we seed plants directly, there's a few things that we need to think about. So what I'd like to do is show you some different seeds. So we'll focus in on some seeds here. So what we see here are beans, spinach, dill, and carrot. So you can see that these seeds differ greatly in terms of size, especially. So that means you need to be planting them differently. So generally, the larger the seed, like the beans, the deeper you need to plant them. So beans I generally plant at about 1.5 inches or approximately 3 centimeters deep. The carrots, on the other hand, these very tiny seeds here, usually I plant them on the surface of the soil and then sprinkle a thin layer of soil on top of them. Another thing to think about is the spacing. How far apart do you place them in the row, and how far apart do you make their rows? So again, bigger seeds like the beans, you would seed further apart, and carrots closer together. Generally, when you buy a package of seeds, there is recommendations on the back which include things like the row width, or how many plants to plant in a row, how far apart to plant them, and how deep to plant them, and also include some of the conditions that you would plant it in. So what I would like to do now is to show you some of the plants in my garden that I've started from seed and talk about a little bit the conditions that optimize their growth. So here in this garden, I have peas here, spinach here, and lettuce further down there. So these 3 crops were all planted on May 2nd. So they are quite hardy plants, which means that they can withstand some frost. They also prefer cooler weather to grow in, so planting them as early in the spring as possible is a good idea. So the peas here, you can see there's a fence behind them. So these are actually a snap peas, so the ones that you eat the whole pod. So they tend to grow quite high, and having this fence allows them to grow up higher and not fall over. And you can see how they're spaced probably about 1 to 2 inches apart in the row. The lettuce, which is down here, again, seeded on May 2nd, tends to be, is maybe a little bit too crowded. I could actually remove some of these plants and transplant them, but generally with the lettuce, I like to just pull the leaves rather than pull the whole plant to eat and leave the plant growing, and so then maybe it's okay to be crowded like this. And the same thing with the spinach here. I like to just grab the leaves off of the plant so the plant can continue to grow. In the middle here we see cucumbers, so I have actually 2 hills of cucumbers. And your thought may be, well, why is there so much space in between these cucumbers? And that's because cucumbers are vines, so these will actually grow quite large and fill in this whole area. And one advantage too of growing them beside the peas and the lettuce and the spinach is that by mid-July, the peas and the lettuce and the spinach will basically be finished. I can remove them and then give even more room for the cucumbers to grow. Behind me here, I have garlic, and this was actually not seeded, rather we planted the bulbs in the fall. And so you can see it's quite large, and it has that extra growing time because it started first thing in the spring. So another thing you can grow by seed is herbs, lots of your herbs. And this depends a little bit on how early you want to transplant them. So again, a lot of herbs can be started indoors and transplanted, but if you want to harvest them early, but dill, which this one is here, I actually like to plant by seed because I don't generally use it until the end of the summer when I'm doing pickles, and so I don't need to harvest it early on in the summer. Other herbs like basil and parsley, I'll actually buy the plants that have been started indoors so that I can harvest them a bit earlier. Okay, so behind me here you see tomatoes. So tomatoes are plants that transplant easily. So these ones I would have purchased at a nursery and planted them as small plants. Right here I have beans. So these beans are warm weather plants. They are very susceptible to frost, so they need to be planted after all chance of frost. So these were planted on May 21st. And one thing I like to do with beans is plant consecutive crops. So you can see this first crop, it's not very big. Beans do produce quite heavily, so for just the two of us that live in my house, this small row here is lots. But they also produce heavily and then don't produce very much after that. So what I do is I plant more rows. So you can see here, I've actually got another row of beans started. And then in about a week or so, I'll plant another row. And in fact, I can plant beans until about mid-July and still be able to harvest them before the first frost in September. In front of me here, these very tiny plants here, these are carrots. And the carrots I planted on the same day as I planted the beans. So you can see how different they are in size compared to the beans that you just saw. Carrot seeds I find tend to sit in the ground for a long time before they germinate or emerge, and then initially they don't grow very quickly, so it takes a bit of patience on my part to plant carrots. Also with the carrots, you remember the seeds are very, very small, and so what I do is I plant a lot of them. You can see how close some of these plants are. So when the plants get a little bit bigger, I will actually thin them out, thinking about how big a carrot actually is, so that each carrot plant has enough room to grow. So one other advantage that I find in planting seeds as opposed to buying plants is that you tend to get more choice. So if I went into a nursery, let's say to buy cucumbers, for example, or maybe lettuce, I might have 5 to 10 varieties that are there. However, if I look for seed, either in a local seed store or order online from a seed company, I have a lot more options. So just one final word on gardening outdoors in a garden. You can see here we have a fence around this garden. That's because there's a lot of other creatures that like to eat the same foods that we like, and this way I can protect the plants. I find that rabbits especially like the early first leaves that come out when the plant is the most vulnerable. So sometimes in gardening it is important to have some sort of fence so that your plants get to grow. Maintaining a garden can seem like a huge job, especially the weeding aspect. But one thing that I have found is that as long as I'm doing it on a regular basis, like I take about half an hour to 1 hour a week, get out my hoe and try to go through the whole garden, remove the weeds while they're small, and then it doesn't seem like such a daunting task. And in fact, it can be a really nice way just to spend an evening after sitting in front of a desk at work all day. I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned a little bit about planting seeds.